The sound of the bus engine was a low, tired rumble. Private first class. Evelyn Reed stared out the window, her reflection looking back at her. In the glass, she saw the dark green wool of her Women's Army Corps uniform. It was a uniform she wore with pride, but one that still felt new, still felt strange. Outside, the rolling hills of rural Pennsylvania were painted in the bleak colors of late 1944. The trees were bare, their branches like dark scratches against a gray sky. Evelyn was not a combat soldier. She had known that when she signed up in her small Ohio town. She had wanted to do her part, to free up a man for the front. She had been trained as a clerk, a typist. But the Army, in its infinite wisdom, had seen her steady nerves and her quiet resolve. They assigned her to the military police, and now they were sending her to a place called Camp Havenwood. It was not a famous camp. It was a new low-security holding center for a new kind of prisoner, German women. Nurses, clerks, radio operators, and other auxiliaries who had been captured in the collapsing fronts in France and Belgium. The bus groaned to a stop at a high-wire fence. A sign read, Camp Havenwood, POW Facility. Evelyn grabbed her duffel bag and stepped off the bus. The air was cold and damp. It smelled of wet earth and coal smoke. A man stood waiting for her, a cigarette hanging from his lip. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a face that looked like it had been carved from hardwood. The 3 stripes on his sleeve identified him as a sergeant. "You're the replacement?" he grunted, not bothering to introduce himself. "Yes, Sergeant. Private First Class Evelyn Reed, reporting for duty." The sergeant, whose name tag read Miller, looked her up and down. His eyes were cold. "A whack. Well, isn't that just dandy? They finally sent us a nursemaid." Evelyn felt a familiar heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice level. "I'm trained in guard duty, Sergeant." Miller let out a short, humorless laugh. "Guard duty. Right. Look, Reed, let's get one thing straight. This isn't a social club. It's not a Sunday school picnic. Those women in there," he thumbed over his shoulder at the barracks, "are the enemy. They're Krauts. They hate you. They hate that uniform, and they hate everything this country stands for. Your job is to watch them, count them, and make sure they don't cause trouble. You are not here to be their friend. You are not here to help them. You got that?" "Crystal clear, Sergeant," Evelyn said, her voice firm. "We'll see," he muttered. He led her through the gates, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. "The Commandant, Colonel Hayes, is a busy man. You'll answer to me. Your barracks are over there. Shift starts at 1800. Don't be late. And try not to get in the way." Evelyn spent the next few hours settling into the small, cold room she was assigned in the WAC barracks. The other women on her shift were polite but distant. They had already learned the rules of this place. Keep your head down, do your job, and don't cross Sergeant Miller. At 1800, Evelyn reported for her first shift. The sun was setting, casting long, dark shadows across the compound. Miller was waiting for her at the door to the prisoner barracks. It was a long wooden building covered in tar paper. "All right, Reed," Miller said, his voice laced with mock patience. "Time for the evening count. You just follow me. Keep your mouth shut and look tough. These women can smell weakness. And frankly, right now, you reek of it." Evelyn ignored the insult. Her heart was pounding, but her face was a mask of professional calm. She was not weak. She was just new. Miller unlocked the heavy wooden door. He didn't knock. He kicked the door open with his boot. It slammed against the inside wall with a crack that made Evelyn jump. "Achtung!" Miller roared into the dimly lit room. "Raus! Aufstehen!" Evelyn followed him inside, and her breath caught. The room was long, filled with 24 metal cots, and on or near those cots were the prisoners. They were women, yes, but they looked like ghosts. Their faces were thin, pale, and smudged with dirt. Their uniforms were ragged. Some wore threadbare civilian clothes, but it was their eyes that struck Evelyn. They were filled with a deep, bottomless fear. As Miller stomped down the central aisle, yelling for them to line up, the women scrambled. They moved with a terrified speed as if expecting a blow. One woman, who looked barely older than Evelyn, stumbled and fell. Miller barked a laugh. "Clumsy, aren't they?" Evelyn automatically moved to help the woman up. "Reed!" Miller snapped. "What did I tell you?" "Don't touch them." Evelyn froze, her hand outstretched. The woman on the floor flinched away from her, crawling back to her cot. Evelyn pulled her hand back, her face burning with a mixture of shame and anger. They finished the count. All 24 women were present. Miller grunted, made a note on his clipboard, and turned to leave. He marched out, leaving Evelyn to secure the door. Evelyn paused at the threshold. The women were still standing at attention, their bodies rigid with fear. They stared at her, their eyes wide. They were waiting for her to yell, to hit them, to kick the door shut just as Miller had kicked it open. Evelyn looked at them, her gaze moving from face to face. She saw the terror. She saw the exhaustion. She saw the humanity they were trying so hard to hide. She didn't slam the door. She pulled it closed gently. The latch clicked into place, the sound echoing in the tense silence. For the next 2 weeks, this was her life. Miller assigned her the worst shifts. The midnight to dawn watch. The inspections after a rain when the compound was a sea of mud. He mocked her constantly in front of the male guards. "Careful, boys. Don't cuss. Private Reed is on duty. We wouldn't want to hurt her delicate ears." The other male guards took their cue from him. They either ignored her or treated her like a mascot, a joke. "Hey, Reed, go fetch the coffee, will you?" "That's a good girl." Evelyn took it. She did her job. She fetched the coffee. She filed the reports. She walked her patrols. She was firm with the prisoners, but she never yelled. She never shoved. She used a clear, level voice, and she did one other thing. Miller never noticed it. The other guards didn't, but the prisoners did. Every time she came to their barracks for a count or for an inspection, she would stop at the door. She would lift her hand. And she would knock. Just 2 sharp, polite raps. Knock, knock. The first time she did it, the women inside froze. They stared at the door as if it were a bomb. They had been conditioned to the sound of a key scraping, a boot kicking, a man yelling. The sound of a simple knock was so alien, so profoundly polite, that they didn't know how to react. When Evelyn entered, she would see them. Their faces were a mask of confusion. Why would a guard knock? Guards were masters. They were captors. They didn't ask permission to enter. They took. One woman in particular watched her. Her name, Evelyn had learned from the rosters, was Liesel. She was older than the others, maybe 30. She had blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes were a cold, intelligent blue. She was the unofficial leader of the barracks. When she moved, the others followed. And her eyes never left Evelyn. They were not filled with fear like the others. They were filled with suspicion. One evening, Sergeant Miller happened to be walking by the barracks just as Evelyn was starting her rounds. He watched, hidden in the shadows, as she approached the door. He saw her raise her gloved hand. Knock, knock. She waited a beat, then unlocked the door and went inside. Miller's face contorted in disbelief. He waited until she came back out, her face calm and professional. "Reed!" he hissed, grabbing her arm. "What in the hell do you think you were just doing?" Evelyn was startled. "My rounds, Sergeant." "No, that." He pointed at the door. You knocked." He said the word as if it were a curse. "You knocked on the door." "For them?" Evelyn pulled her arm free. "It's a courtesy, Sergeant." "A courtesy?" He was sputtering, his face turning red. "A courtesy?" "They are prisoners of war. They are the enemy that is killing our boys overseas. We are not here to be courteous. We are here to keep them locked up. What's next, Private? Are you going to bring them flowers? Ask them if their cots are comfortable enough?" "No, Sergeant," Evelyn said, her voice shaking but her spine rigid. "I am going to treat them like human beings, because that's what they are, and it's what I am. It doesn't mean I'm soft. It doesn't mean I'm their friend. It means I am doing my job without sacrificing my own decency." Miller stared at her, his eyes narrowed to slits. He saw the strength in her, the absolute refusal to bend to his bullying. And he hated her for it. "You're a fool, Reed," he spat. "You're a naive little girl playing army. And one of these days, that decency of yours is going to get you or someone else hurt. Now get back to your patrol. You're on latrine duty for the next week." Evelyn watched him storm off. She felt the sting of injustice. She was doing her job better than he was. She was maintaining order without resorting to terror. But to him, her kindness was a weakness. Her gender was a liability. She turned and looked back at the dark, silent barracks. The wind was cold, but she felt a small, hot fire of determination inside her. She would not let him break her. She would not become him. She was right about one thing. The women inside had heard the entire exchange. They had heard the sergeant's angry voice, and they had heard Evelyn's quiet, steady reply. Inside the darkness, for the first time, the wall of suspicion began to crack. They were shocked that a guard would knock. They were even more shocked that a guard would defend doing it. Life at Camp Havenwood settled into a grim, monotonous routine. The winter deepened. The mud turned to frozen, jagged earth. The wind howled through the thin walls of the barracks, for the prisoners and the guards alike. Evelyn's week of latrine duty came and went. Sergeant Miller continued his campaign of quiet harassment. He lost her paperwork, forcing her to redo it. He assigned her to patrol the most remote sections of the fence during the coldest hours of the night. He openly criticized her in front of the male guards, who now treated her with a cold indifference. Evelyn was isolated. The injustice of it all was a heavy weight. She wrote letters home to Ohio, but she censored herself. She didn't tell her mother about Sergeant Miller. She didn't describe the hopeless, haunted eyes of the prisoners. She wrote about the landscape, the weather, and how proud she was to serve. But inside, she felt herself growing harder, colder. She continued to knock. Knock, knock. It became her signature. It was a small act of defiance. It was a reminder to herself, as much as to the prisoners, that she was still Evelyn Reed from Ohio, not just a set of keys and a uniform. The German women had changed, too. The animal terror they'd shown on that first day was gone. They still obeyed Miller with frantic speed. But when Evelyn was on duty, the atmosphere in the barracks was different. It was still tense, but it was not the tension of a prey animal. It was the tension of observation. Liesel, the stoic leader, watched Evelyn's every move. She saw Evelyn get the worst duties. She saw Miller mock her. She saw the other guards shun her. And she saw Evelyn absorb it all, her back straight, her chin up. One afternoon, Evelyn was standing near the mess hall, stamping her feet to keep warm. Two male guards, replacements from Miller's own platoon, walked by. They didn't even look at her. "Can't believe he's got a whack guarding them," one of them said, just loud enough for her to hear. "It's a man's job. What's she gonna do if they riot? Ask them pretty please to stop?" "Miller says she's a soft touch," the other one laughed. "Thinks she's at a finishing school knocking on their door?" Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. She pictured her father, a man who worked the steel mills and taught her that strength wasn't about how loud you could shout, but about how long you could endure. She opened her eyes, her resolve hardening. A few days later, the mail call came. It was the bright spot in her week. She received a small, precious package from her mother. Her hands, numb with cold, fumbled with the string. Inside were 3 pairs of thick, hand-knit wool socks, a long letter, and 3 bars of Hershey's chocolate. Evelyn's breath hitched. Chocolate. She hadn't seen or tasted real chocolate in months. It was a luxury. It was a taste of home, of childhood, of a world without wire fences and gray skies. She tucked the package inside her coat, a small, secret warmth against her chest. That night, her shift was from midnight to 4 in the morning. The camp was silent, buried under a thin layer of snow. The only sound was the crunch of her boots and the distant whine of the wind. She was cold, she was tired, and she was lonely. The insults from the other guards echoed in her head. Soft touch. Nursemaid. She patrolled the perimeter, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. She felt the hard rectangle of the chocolate bars in her pocket. She could eat one. It would be a small comfort. God knew she had earned it. But as she passed the dark prisoner barracks, she thought of the women inside. She thought of their pale, thin faces. Their rations were the bare minimum. Bland stew, hard bread, watery coffee. There was no comfort for them. No taste of home. They were the enemy, yes. Miller was right about that, but they were also women. Cold, hungry, and defeated women. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, from a time long ago when she'd been reluctant to share a toy. "Kindness costs nothing, Evie, but it's worth everything." Sergeant Miller's words came back to her. "What's next, Private? Are you going to bring them flowers?" Evelyn stopped walking. A sudden defiant idea took root. It was risky. Fraternizing with prisoners was a serious offense. Miller would have her court-martialed if he found out. But it wasn't fraternizing. It wasn't a game, as Miller would call it. It was something else. Her mind was made up. She made her way to the barracks. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. She quietly unlocked the door. She did not knock, not this time. She didn't want to wake them. She slipped inside. The room was dark, but a small stove in the corner provided a faint, dull glow. The air was heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies and stale blankets. She heard the sound of slow, regular breathing. All 24 women were asleep or pretending to be. Evelyn moved like a shadow. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was a foolish risk. She moved from cot to cot. On each woman's rough blanket, near where their head lay, she placed a small square of Hershey's chocolate. She had broken the 3 bars into 24 pieces. She got to the last cot. It belonged to Liesel. The woman was facing the wall, but Evelyn could tell from the tension in her shoulders that she was not asleep. She was listening. Evelyn placed the last square of chocolate on the blanket. She paused, then whispered into the darkness, so quietly it was barely a breath. Frohe Weihnachten, she said. Merry Christmas. It was still a week away, but it was the only German she knew. Then, as silently as she had entered, she left. She locked the door and walked away into the swirling snow, her pocket suddenly feeling very light. The next morning, the camp routine began as usual. The prisoners were marched to the mess hall for their grim breakfast. But something was different. The guards on the morning shift noticed it. The women were silent, but it was a different kind of silence. They moved in a daze. Their eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. One of the male guards, a corporal named Johnson, reported to Sergeant Miller. "It's the weirdest thing, Sergeant," Johnson said, clearly confused. "I was passing the barracks an hour ago, just before dawn, and I heard crying." Miller looked up from his desk. "Crying, so what?" "They're prisoners. They're supposed to be miserable." "No, sir, not like that," Johnson insisted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't wailing. It was quiet, really quiet. I looked through the peephole. "And you're not going to believe this." "Spit it out, Corporal." "They were all just sitting on their cots. Most of them. And they were crying. Even the tough one, Liesel, just tears streaming down her face. And they were all holding something small and dark." Miller was on his feet in an instant. "Something dark? A weapon? A tool?" "No, sir," Johnson said, scratching his head. It looked like candy." Miller's face went from confusion to a dark, furious understanding. He stormed out of his office and across the compound, his boots slamming the frozen ground. He found Evelyn as she was coming off her shift, her face numb with cold. "Read!" he bellowed. Evelyn snapped to attention. "Sergeant!" He got so close his face was inches from hers. He was vibrating with rage. "You, what did you do?" I don't know what you mean, Sergeant." "Don't lie to me, Private." "The prisoners. The crying. The candy." Evelyn's stomach dropped, but she held his gaze. She would not lie. "It was chocolate, Sergeant." Miller looked at her as if she had just confessed to treason. "Chocolate." He said the word slowly, tasting the insanity of it. "You get the enemy chocolate." "It was from my mother," Evelyn said, her voice quiet but strong. "I had extra." "You had extra." Miller was speechless for a moment. He looked around as if searching for a witness to this madness. "You are fraternizing with the enemy, Private Reed. That is a court-martial offense. You are undermining discipline. You are. He was so angry he couldn't even find the words. He was right. She had broken a major rule. She had given a gift to the enemy. "They're not just the enemy, Sergeant," Evelyn said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "They're people. They're women. They're cold and they're scared and they're a long way from home. Just like us. It was a piece of chocolate, not a weapon. It was a moment of humanity. If that's a crime, then I guess I'm guilty." Miller stared at her, his jaw working. He wanted to destroy her. He wanted to have her thrown in the stockade. But he saw something in her eyes. An integrity he couldn't break. And worse, he knew that if he reported her for this, for giving out chocolate, he might be the one who looked foolish to the colonel. How do you court-martial a whack for sharing her Christmas candy? "You're a danger, Reed," he finally hissed, his voice low and full of venom. "You're soft in the head. This isn't over. I am watching you. Every single move you make. One more slip-up, one more act of humanity, and I will have your stripes." He turned and stalked away. Evelyn let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She was shaking, not from the cold, but from the confrontation. She had stood up to him. She had done what she thought was right, and she had faced the consequences. She looked over at the prisoner barracks. It was quiet now. The women were being marched to their morning work detail, cleaning the camp. As they passed, Liesel was at the back of the line. Their eyes met for just a second. Evelyn saw no suspicion in Liesel's face. She saw no coldness. She saw something new. It was a deep, painful, and profound confusion. And for the first time, a flicker of something that looked almost like gratitude. The chocolate had done more than the knocking ever could. It had broken through the wall of propaganda. They had been told the Americans were monsters. The chocolate incident changed everything. Sergeant Miller's prediction of a slip-up was wrong. The prisoners didn't become unruly. They didn't see Evelyn's kindness as weakness. They saw it as strength, a strength none of their own guards had ever shown them. They became compliant. Not just compliant, but cooperative. When Evelyn was on duty, work details finished faster. The barracks were kept cleaner. The sullen, hostile silence was replaced by a quiet, watchful respect. Miller hated it. He saw the change. He saw that the prisoners who still flinched when he roared would stand respectfully when Evelyn spoke. Her softness was achieving better results than his toughness, and it infuriated him. He doubled her worst duties, but the mockery from the other guards subsided. They might not have understood Evelyn's methods, but they couldn't argue with the results. The women's barracks, once the most volatile part of the camp, was now the calmest. The biggest change was in Liesel. One cold afternoon, Evelyn was supervising the women as they mended old uniforms in the supply hut. Evelyn was standing by the door, trying to stay out of the way. Liesel put down her sewing, stood up, and approached her. The other women in the room stopped working, their eyes wide. A prisoner never approached a guard unless spoken to. Liesel stood in front of Evelyn. She was a tall woman, and their eyes were almost level. "Private Reed," she said. Her English was heavily accented but clear. "Yes, Liesel?" Evelyn's heart beat a little faster. Liesel seemed to struggle for words. She gestured toward the door of the hut. "You... Klopfen!" She tapped her knuckles against the wooden door frame, imitating Evelyn's knock. "Why?" Evelyn was taken aback by the direct question. She chose her words carefully. "It's polite. It's a way of showing respect." Liesel's brow furrowed. "Respect? For us? We are Kriegsgefangene, prisoners of war." "You are," Evelyn agreed. "But you are also people. You deserve the dignity of a knock." Liesel absorbed this, her expression unreadable. Then she asked her next question. "The chocolate. The chocolate. Why?" Evelyn met her gaze. "It was Christmas." "It was kind," Liesel said, the word sounding foreign on her tongue. Our side, they told us, you were ungeheuer monsters," Evelyn supplied quietly. "Yes, monsters." Liesel shook her head, a small, sad movement. "They said you would hurt us, that you were animals." "We were told the same things about you," Evelyn replied. A long silence stretched between them. The chasm of war, of propaganda, of hate seemed to shrink in that small, cold hut. Liesel nodded as if a private question had been answered. "You are not a monster, Private Reed." She then turned, went back to her seat, and picked up her sewing. The fragile bridge was built. From that day on, Liesel would sometimes speak to Evelyn. Small things at first. She would ask for an extra blanket for one of the younger girls who was sick. She would report a leak in the roof. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was acting as a leader, and she was treating Evelyn as her counterpart, not her jailer. Evelyn learned bits of her story. Liesel was from a small village near Bavaria. She wasn't a soldier. She was a clerk, a secretary for a regional administrator. She was educated. She spoke English and French, As the American army advanced, her entire office had been captured. "I did not want this," Liesel said one day, her voice low. "This war. I typed the lists. I filed the reports. It was a job?" She said this with a deep, unsettling sadness. One snowy day in January, a new energy crackled through Camp Havenwood. A special convoy of jeeps and heavy trucks rolled through the gates. The guards were on high alert. Sergeant Miller was puffed up, barking orders. "This is a high-security transfer. All prisoners are on lockdown. No one in or out of the barracks. Reed, you're on office duty. Answer the phone and stay out of the way." Evelyn, relegated to a desk, watched through the window. She saw a group of male prisoners, 5 of them in German officer uniforms. They were being escorted into the colonel's office, likely for temporary holding before being sent to a high-security interrogation center. One of them stood out. He was tall, with a perfectly pressed uniform, shining black boots, and a cold, arrogant face. He looked around the shabby camp with an expression of pure disdain. Even in chains, he walked like he owned the ground beneath him. "That one's a big fish," the radio operator next to Evelyn muttered. "A commandant. Name's Richter. Captured him near Bastogne." Just then, the door to the office opened. Liesel and another prisoner were there, escorted by a guard. They were on their daily cleaning detail for the administration building. "Sergeant," the guard said to Miller. "The prisoners for cleaning detail." Miller waved them in dismissively. Fine. Just get it done. And keep your eyes down," he snapped at the women. Liesel and the other woman began sweeping the hallway, their heads bowed. Evelyn went back to her paperwork, the arrogant officer's face fading from her mind. The commandant and the other prisoners were being processed one by one. The arrogant one, Richter, was last. He was led down the hall, right past where Liesel was sweeping. Evelyn just happened to look up at that exact moment. As Commandant Richter passed, his cold eyes swept over the 2 women. He didn't even slow down. But Liesel froze. The color drained from her face. Her entire body went rigid. The broom fell from her hands, clattering loudly on the wooden floor. She made a small, choked sound like an animal in a trap. Her hands flew to her face and she pressed herself back against the wall, trembling violently. It was a reaction of pure, unadulterated terror. "Clumsy fool," Miller yelled at her, not noticing the cause. "Get back to work!" The other male guards laughed. Commandant Richter didn't even look back. He was escorted into an interrogation room. But Evelyn had seen it. She had seen Liesel's face. This wasn't the fear of a prisoner for a guard. This was something deeper, something personal. Liesel was practically hyperventilating. The other prisoner tried to help her, but Liesel shoved her away, grabbed her broom, and all but ran down the hall, disappearing into the latrines. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Sergeant Miller was busy. The camp was in lockdown. Evelyn was supposed to be at her desk, but she couldn't shake the image of Liesel's face. She waited for a moment when Miller was distracted, yelling at the convoy drivers. She slipped out of her chair and went down the hall to the latrines. She pushed the door open. It was empty except for one stall. She could hear someone inside making quiet, desperate, gasping sounds. "Liesel?" Evelyn said softly. The sound stopped. "Liesel, it's Private Reed. It's Evelyn. Are you all right?" There was a long pause, then the sound of the latch. The door opened. Liesel looked destroyed. Her face was paper white, her eyes wide with a horror Evelyn had never seen before. He is here," she whispered, her voice shaking so badly she could barely form the words. "Who? The officer? Commandant Richter?" Liesel shook her head frantically. "No, not Commandant. No, that is not his name. What do you mean?" Evelyn asked, grabbing her arms to steady her. "Who is he?" Liesel looked at her, her eyes begging Evelyn to understand. "He is der Teufel, the devil, from my home, near my village. He is not Wehrmacht. He is not a soldier." "Then who is he?" Liesel leaned in, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "He is SS. He is SS Obersturmbannführer Herzog, the Butcher." Evelyn felt a jolt, as if she'd touched a live wire. SS, a rank that high? The Butcher. Liesel, you have to be sure, Evelyn said, her voice firm. I am sure. Liesel's voice cracked. I told you I was a clerk. I typed the lists. His lists. The lists of people. From the villages? The ones who disappeared. The transports. The special operations. I typed his name. I saw his face. I saw what he did. Suddenly, Liesel's strange sadness about her job made horrifying sense. She wasn't just filing papers. She was a witness. He is a war criminal, Liesel choked out. A mass murderer. And he is here. He is pretending. A Wehrmachtkommandant. They will send him to a regular camp. He will escape. He will live. Evelyn's mind raced. The arrogant officer. The fake name, Liesel's terror. It all fit. This was the injustice. A monster was slipping through their fingers wearing the mask of a simple soldier. And Sergeant Miller, with his barking and his arrogance, was about to let it happen. He wouldn't listen to her. He would laugh in her face. He would accuse her of fraternizing and believing prisoner lies. Liesel, Evelyn said, her voice now hard as steel. You said you typed the lists. Do you remember them? Liesel looked confused. What? The lists? The transports? Do you remember details, dates, numbers? Anything that can prove who he is? Liesel closed her eyes, her face tight with concentration. The mind of a secretary, trained to remember details, began to work. Yes, the transport codes, they all began with FSR, and the date, the big one, from Ardennes. December 7, 1944, transport FSR 88. He signed it. Herzog. Evelyn memorized the codes. FSR 88. Evelyn, Liesel whispered, grabbing her sleeve. If he knows I am here, he will kill me even here. He will find a way. He won't, Evelyn said, her face set with a resolve that was absolute. I won't let him. She left Liesel in the latrine and walked back to the office. Her softness was gone. Her naivete was gone. In their place was a cold, hard anger. Sergeant Miller was just coming out of the interrogation room, laughing with one of the convoy guards. Yeah, he's a real piece of work. Evelyn Reed stepped into Colonel Hayes's office. The room was neat, orderly, and smelled of pipe tobacco. Her career, she knew, was hanging by a thread. She could be court-martialed for insubordination, for fraternizing, for any number of things Sergeant Miller was dreaming up. Colonel Hayes shut the door, leaving an apoplectic Miller pacing in the hallway. The colonel sat down behind his heavy oak desk. He did not invite Evelyn to sit. Private, he said, his voice calm. I want you to repeat exactly what you just told me. Leave nothing out. Evelyn stood at attention. She recounted everything. The knock, the chocolate, the slow building trust with Liesel. She described Liesel's job as a clerk, her profound sadness, and the absolute paralyzing terror on her face when she saw the prisoner. She finished with the name Herzog and the transport code FSR 88. Hayes listened without interrupting. His face was a perfect, unreadable mask. When she was finished, he was silent for a full minute. Evelyn could hear her own heart pounding. You are aware, he said finally, that fraternizing with the enemy is a grave offense. You are aware that you have broken protocol. You have given gifts to the prisoners. You have engaged them in personal conversation. You have, by Sergeant Miller's standards, failed completely as a guard. Yes, sir, Evelyn said, her voice small but firm. You are also aware, he continued, that prisoners of war will say anything to cause disruption. They will lie. They will create chaos. They will pit us against each other. This woman, Liesel, could be using you to settle an old score or simply to get one of her own officers in trouble. I don't believe so, sir, Evelyn said. The fear I saw was real. It wasn't hatred. It was terror. She knows him. And she knows what he did. Colonel Hayes stared at her. You took an incredible risk, Private. You risked your position, your rank, your freedom, all for a feeling, all based on the trust you built by knocking on a door and handing out chocolate. Yes, sir. Hayes let out a long, slow breath. He picked up the secure telephone on his desk. Get me General Donovan's office at G2, he said into the receiver. Authorization code Alpha Niner Tango. Evelyn's eyes widened. G2 was Army intelligence. This was far above the camp's pay grade. Hayes waited, tapping a pencil on his desk. Yes, this is Colonel Hayes at Camp Havenwood. I have a shadow file query. That's correct. I'm looking for any intel connected to transport code Foxtrot Sierra Romeo 88. Yes, and a possible link to the name Herzog. Herzog. An SS Obersturmbannführer? Yes, I'll hold. The silence in the room was deafening. Evelyn tried not to shake. Sergeant Miller was right about one thing. If she was wrong, she was finished. She had staked her entire career on the word of a German prisoner. Hayes's expression suddenly sharpened. Yes, I see. Understood. No, he is here. Currently under the alias Commandant Richter of the 2nd Panzer. Yes, sir. We are securing him now. Thank you. The colonel hung up the phone. He looked at Evelyn, and for the first time, his mask slipped. His eyes were wide with a kind of stunned respect. Private Reed, he said slowly. You just caught one of the biggest fish in the European theater. This was the twist. The powerful, satisfying truth. The prisoner, Richter, is, in fact, SS Obersturmbannführer Klaus Herzog, the butcher of Ardennes. G2 has been hunting him for a month. He was responsible for the Malmedy massacre and at least 2 others. He shed his SS uniform, took the identity of a Wehrmacht commandant he'd had executed, and was trying to surrender into the general POW population. He would have been sent to a comfortable officers' camp and in all likelihood would have vanished. Hayes stood up. That code you gave me, FSR 88, was the internal designation for the transport that moved the execution squads. G2 had no idea. Your prisoner, Liesel, just handed us the key to convicting him of war crimes. Evelyn felt a wave of dizziness. Sir, Sergeant Miller. Hayes called, yanking the door open. Miller, who had clearly been listening, almost fell into the room. Sir! Sergeant, post 2 additional guards on the prisoner Richter. He is to have no contact with anyone. He is not a Wehrmacht officer. He is a high-priority SS war criminal. Special investigators from G2 are en route. He is to be considered extremely dangerous. Miller's jaw went slack. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, a grudging, horrified understanding. He looked at Evelyn, who was still standing at attention. He didn't know what to say. And Sergeant, the colonel added, his voice like ice, get the prisoner Liesel. Bring her to my office under full protective guard. She is now the most valuable witness we have. Yes. Yes, sir! Miller saluted, his eyes darting one last time to Evelyn, and he hurried off, his authority completely punctured. Colonel Hayes turned back to Evelyn. Private, what you did was unorthodox. It was not by the book, and Sergeant Miller was by his definition correct. You were not a tough guard. He paused, walking to the window. But war isn't always about being the toughest. This is a different kind of fight. You didn't break that prisoner. You didn't terrorize her. You gave her a piece of chocolate. You treated her like a human being. And in doing so, you gained something that Miller's toughness never could have. What's that, sir? Evelyn asked. The truth, Hayes said. You got justice. That softness Miller was so afraid of just put a monster in chains. You've done a great service to this army and to your country. Evelyn let out the breath she'd been holding since she first knocked on that door. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me, Private, Hayes said, a rare, small smile touching his lips. You've earned your place here. You are a fine soldier. Now go and get some coffee. You look exhausted. Yes, sir. Evelyn saluted, turned, and walked out of the office. As she stepped into the hallway, she saw him, Herzog. The butcher. He was being led back to a holding cell. But this time, the guards were not relaxed. They were tense, their weapons ready. Herzog's arrogant mask was gone. His face was pale. He had seen the new guards, the way they were treating him. He knew the game was over. His eyes met Evelyn's as he passed. In them, she saw no more arrogance, only a new, cold, reptilian hatred. He knew somehow that she was the one who had done this. Evelyn didn't flinch. She just watched him until he was gone. Her redemption was complete. Her sacrifice, the weeks of insults and isolation, had been for this: to expose a truth that brutality never could have uncovered. The next day, the camp was buzzing. The G2 investigators had come and gone, taking Herzog with them. Liesel had been taken too, but to a safe house, where she would be the star witness at his trial. Evelyn was on her evening shift. She walked the compound, the gravel crunching under her boots. The air felt cleaner. The other guards nodded to her as she passed. They didn't smile, but the mockery was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, baffled respect. She approached the women's barracks to do the evening count. As she reached the door, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Sergeant Miller. Evelyn stopped, her hand automatically going to the key on her belt. "Sergeant." Miller stood there for a moment, shifting his weight. He looked at the ground, then at the door, then at her. He seemed to be wrestling with himself. "Private Reed," he said. His voice was a low growl. He was not a man who knew how to apologize. He cleared his throat. "The new prisoner rosters are on your desk. Make sure they're filled out correctly." "I will, Sergeant," Evelyn said. He nodded, still not looking her in the eye. He was about to turn and leave, to let the moment pass. But then he stopped. He looked at the heavy barracks door, and then at her. In a voice so quiet she almost missed it, he grunted, "Go on, then." Evelyn was confused. "Sergeant." Miller nodded at the door, his face a grim mask. "Do your thing. Go on, knock." Evelyn looked at him. It was the only way he knew how to say it. It was his white flag. It was his admission that her way had worked. A small, strong smile touched Evelyn's lips. It was a smile of victory, not over Miller, but over the cynicism he represented. She nodded to him. "Yes, Sergeant." She turned to the door. She lifted her hand, and in the cold, quiet Pennsylvania night she knocked. Knock, knock. The sound was clear, polite, and strong. It was the sound of decency. It was the sound of her own quiet strength, a strength that had brought a monster to justice and earned her the respect she deserved. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, ready for the duties of the night.